Welcome to the Thrive Podcast with the Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church.
How does your faith kind of play into it, or does it play into it?
What can be done about it? When I say the church, I'm talking about evangelical white Christians and the black folk who attend their churches.
Hello, welcome to the Thrive Podcast with the Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church. This is the second interview Thrive Podcast for the year of our Lord 2020, and we are grateful for your viewership on YouTube, your listenership on iTunes and Spotify. As always, we want to hear from you. You can reach me directly at Fred Jeff Smith at Cox.net, Fred Jeff Smith at Cox.net, and you can tell us how we're doing, what we can do to make this podcast more useful and user-friendly to you. I'm very happy today to welcome as our guest here Mr. Antoine Pierce. Mr. Pierce is an activist within our community. He is an actor within our community. He is a mentor for young men within our community. And most recently, he has announced his candidacy for the United States Senate in the election against Senator Bill Cassidy, which is upcoming in November of 2020. Mr. Pierce, thank you for taking the time to come and be with us today here at Shiloh.
Well, thank you for having me. It's certainly a pleasure to be here.
Tell us, who is Antoine Pierce? I understand that you're one of 7 children and a native of Baton Rouge. Tell us about Antoine Pierce.
That's right. I am one of 7 children. Very big family. Grew up right here in Baton Rouge. We moved around a lot. But I graduated from Estruma High School. Very proud. They're dirty. Class of 1999.
Okay.
Very proud Estruma graduate. And I went to LSU and graduated from there in Child and Family Studies, got a Bachelor of Science, and now I'm getting ready to graduate this year with my Master's in Public Administration with a concentration in Public Policy. But more than that, I'm a father. I have a son, a teenager, so pray for me. No, but I mean,
I have 2. I understand.
Yeah. So, but not only that, I've done a lot of community advocacy work. I worked on Mayor Sharon Weston Broom's transition team for the Office of Community Development, and now I currently serve on Governor John Bel Edwards' board for juvenile justice and delinquency prevention. So I'm doing a lot of kind of behind the scenes work,
right.
Policy work, more things that kind of focus on taking care of children, taking care of the working poor, taking care of the middle class, which seems to be a forgotten type of forgotten people in our society. So a lot of the work and the policy work that I'm doing is more centered on helping people that think that their voices have been unheard.
Well, You use the term working behind the scenes, which it sounds like you've done a lot of. What made you decide that you were going to come out from behind the scenes and that you were going to move into the center stage, as you will, and place your name in competition against Bill Cassidy for the United States Senate?
Well, I think what happens is a lot of times we can advocate for these policies. We can push for these policies. We can protest. We can march. We can do what I call screaming into a void. We can do that. But if you don't have the people in place that will implement the policies, that will put these policies in place, that will try to get them passed, then you just have a piece of paper, pretty much. Now, of course, activism works, but I think you have to have those people that support what it is that you're trying to do, sitting in those seats of power to affect the change. So I've decided to take the policy knowledge that I have and to try to get into a place where I can affect change with it, where I can try and advocate for it so that in that seat and try to get it implemented and passed into policy so that people have to respect it as law.
So you chose the Senate, the United States Senate, not the state Senate, not the state House of Representatives. You chose the Senate. Is there a rationale for that being the choice of your candidacy as opposed to other offices?
Yes. I think that right now there's an extreme deficit in the United States Senate. Currently, Democrats hold the majority in the House.
Right.
I mean, I was on my way here. I was listening to the talk surrounding the impeachment proceedings and things like that. But right now, the Republicans hold the majority in the United States Senate, and they are ignoring the American people. Mm-hmm. They are ignoring the voices of the American people. Mm-hmm. They are lockstep with the president, regardless of his corruption and immorality in the office. The standard is so low. So I decided that, I decided around 2016, 2017, mm-hmm. that I would challenge Bill Cassidy, because I confronted him here at a town hall that he hosted at another church. And he was there talking about the flooding at the time. Mm-hmm. And people were still begging for help, for recovery. And the people in the audience began to ask him about health care, because this was right before the repeal vote for the ACA. You know, the Republicans got in, which is another thing, but the Republicans got in office, and immediately their first goal was to strip millions upon millions of Americans from their health care. Right. So he came, and I think this was probably one of the last town halls he did, because when he got there, people started asking him, look, what are you going to do about health care? He did not want to have this conversation for obvious reasons. Right. His plan all along was to vote to repeal it without a replacement. Right. So I confronted him, and I said, listen, what you're going to do is going to hurt the people that you said you're going to work for. Right. You know, and I decided at that point that he wasn't listening, and we needed somebody who was in touch with the people and that was willing to listen. Mm-hmm. So I was going to challenge him, and that's what we've been working towards up until this point.
Okay. So let me ask you certain pragmatic questions. And I don't mean to be indelicate or insensitive. You're a young African-American man running in a blood-red state like Louisiana, where it is difficult to generate support from poor white people for an African-American male. What is it that you are going to present in the small communities throughout this state that will cause white folk to stop, take notice, and say, maybe I can vote for him?
I think there's something purifying about the truth, and that's what I'm going to give to them. Sometimes we write them off as being incapable of seeing past their own bias, or seeing past what we may deem to be their racist ideas, mm-hmm. to see the truth. But I think if you tell them enough, if you show them how these policies are directly affecting them, I know that we can change some minds. Now, I don't think we can change all minds, but my motivation is to, plant some seeds. Right. And we have to start somewhere. So my question isn't, for me, my introspection for myself is, why not try? Mm-hmm. We certainly, of course, our aim is to win this election. Right. But we don't have anything to lose by going out there and trying to change some minds and mm-hmm. let people see the truth, let people know what's really at stake, mm-hmm. White, black, or otherwise. Let them know what's really at stake and how these policies are directly impacting their lives, how this is coming out of your paycheck, how you're straining to get health care, how your Social Security and your Medicare and your Medicaid are going to be cut if this person stays in office. So these types of things, I think, directly impact the person. It's not these high-level policy issues. This is kitchen table conversation, mm-hmm. and that's what we're bringing across the state, and that's what we've been doing for the past few years. Is talking to, and we're going in place in deep conservative pockets and talking to people about how their health care will be stripped away, and most of them already know how they're rationing prescription medications and things like that. So we're going in with the goal of truth, bringing truth to people, and we will let the chips fall where they may.
I'm not suggesting that these people are in any way stupid or even ignorant. I think that they are very much aware of the things that are going on, but this wave of conservatism that is being led by poor white people, not just in this state, but across this country, tells me that in spite of the truth. People will vote against their best interest, believing the lies that the conservative Republican Party, in the person of President Trump, put before them. Do they really believe that a wall is being built on the Mexican border? Do they really believe that Joe Biden's family is responsible for corruption with regard to political activities that are taking place within this country? I don't think that they're crazy. I don't care how much Fox News you watch. You can't be oblivious to the facts. I just believe that they decide to vote against their best interest because they're driven by something else. And the something else that I see them being driven by is racism. The term that you used earlier, I think, is a very good term. Whitelash. This is a response to 8 years of the Barack Obama presidency that, for some people, carried this country too far in a particular direction, and they're ready for the pendulum to swing back.
You know what, though? I honestly don't believe that. Well, let me rephrase it. I think people can be oblivious to the truth. I do. I think that, and not just white folks, all of us are subjected to this. A lot of times we only accept the ideas that match our own confirmation bias. We only watch certain news channels that we think align with our viewpoints. And we'll never listen to Fox. We'll never really read a conservative outlet. We'll never follow conservative news because to us that's repulsive. How can anyone? And there are people on the other side that do the same thing. So all they consume is Hannity. All they consume is Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham.
Right.
And they listen to a lot of Limbaugh on the radio. And
Right.
that's their frame of reference because that's what they want to believe. But somehow when you're subjected to a different fact, even if you reject it, it plants a seed. So now you go back and you look and you say, well, let me compare these things. So for us, our motivation is planting seeds. It's getting out there and at least saying, listen, here's a different perspective that you may not get from Hannity, you may not get from Limbaugh, you may not get from these other conservative outlets. So we're not naive. We know the mountain that we have to climb, but somebody's got to do it. And that's why we're committed to doing this, because we believe that somebody has to get out there and speak the truth, and tell these and give these people a different perspective on what they may be believing, and not just conservatives. Democrats stuck in their ways too, if we can be real about it. We have some ideas that ain't right, but I think if we are open to other people's reality, or if we allow ourselves to be open to some idea, some different perspective, I think the world could be made a better place, or at least, we can start planting those seeds. It may not be me, but the next person and the next person and the next person, if we keep chiseling away, we'll get there. And that's how I'm thinking 20 years down the line.
Sure.
So, I'm a young man. I just turned old enough to run for president. Yeah. So, we're talking about the average age of people that hold office in Congress are 20 years older than me or more. So, I got a long time. I'm starting this now, but I'm not.
I did the math in my head. You said you're a 99 graduate of Strum, which means you were born in 81, which makes you 38 years old.
Yes.
Okay. You're 20 years behind me. I'm 58, you're 38. What has been your experience with the distinctives, the contrast between the average voter that's my age in Louisiana versus the average voter that's your age or the generation that's coming behind you? Because you're 38, there are 18-year-olds out there now who are capable of voting. If I were to ask you to draw distinctions between 58-year-old voters, 38-year-old voters, 18-year-old voters, what would those distinctions be?
One word: flexibility. So I think access to information, access to knowledge. So I think the internet came out around the early 90s, and that was something unheard of, to have all this information, which could be a bad thing too. There's a drawback to access to too much information, but before that, it was unheard of to have access to all the world's knowledge on your computer, So I think from that, the world's a lot smaller, and people become more flexible in their thinking. There's a very conservative line, I think, of Democrats from the much older, and I think as the generations began to trickle down, I think Democrats are much more. I guess liberal is the better word, for lack of better words that I can use. They much more flexible in their thinking, much more leaning towards things that probably would have been taboo to talk about from an older, I'm gonna give you an example.
Okay.
So, gay marriage, for example. Even a lot of older Democrats reject this notion, which on the Democratic side of the spectrum would be a ideological norm, but older Democrats would cringe at the idea of something like that. So I think that flexibility, but I also think that there's a gap in communication. I've heard this phrase tossed around. I don't know if you heard it. Okay, boomer. Have you heard that?
No.
Oh, you've never heard "Okay,
No.
Boomer"? Okay. So my understanding of it is it's a generational response to older people telling younger people what they're doing wrong, or how they should correct their behavior, or it's a principle punch up to the older generation, saying, look, you had your opportunity, you gave us this, let us fix it, type of thing. So I think there's a generational divide in the communication. So the millennial generation, which I'm an older millennial, I'm at the tail end, and I'm in that stuck generation, but there's a communicational divide between the younger millennials, the older millennials, and the Gen Zers, the 18-year-olds that are coming out and going to vote. So I think it almost becomes a rejection of what older Democrats think should be the direction of the party, or should be the direction of our ideology, or whatever the case may be. And so they respond. So you tell them something, they respond, "Okay, boomer," because to them it's a rejection of your generation's ideas of what is right and what's wrong. You handed us this where we are. Like I said, the average age of our elected officials is in 55 and older. So you did this, and now you're telling me what we should be doing. So I reject that, to be honest. But I think that that's the norm now. Most younger people are saying, "Let us figure it out. We got it from here." You sit back and be a mentor. We got it. Let us figure this thing out. And I know each generation had their share of people.
I was about to say, every generation.
Yeah, you had the hippie generation or whatever.
Right.
This kind of rage against the machine, this rebellious generation. But this one, I think, is more so because we have so much access to information at the speed. Everybody's got a smartphone now. Right. So the access to information isn't waiting for the news to tell you or the paper. It's in your hand in an instant. Movement starting in an instant. Yeah. So I think that's what makes it different.
I do accept the fact that different generations think differently. From my perspective, people of my generation and older tend to be more economically moderate and progressive, and socially conservative. So your analogy about gay marriage, I think, is spot on. That there are lines of distinction with regard to social policy issues. But the problem that I see with the younger generation is that they are so black and white about everything. This is right, that is wrong. And older generations have lived long enough, in my opinion, to recognize that it's not in the black or the white, it's in the gray. my mother used to say, life is not black and white. There are a million shades of gray. And what you have to do is find your gray place where you can be comfortable and where you feel like you can make the most significant contribution. And so the frustration that some in my generation feel towards those who are coming behind us, and pretty soon will be the ones that are sitting in the places of power and service, is that you're so absolute about everything. You know, it's all this or all that, and you don't allow for the fact that, or some don't allow for the fact that there are other aspects at play in this.
Man, I just think it's so ironic that you say that, because I think that's exactly how the younger generation views your generation. The same way. We just hold up a mirror and say, see, this is you. This is what you look like to us. Mm-hmm. Absolute. Mm-hmm. It must be this, mm-hmm. or it cannot be that. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where you get the rebellion. That's where you get the rejection of these ideas, because like you said, there's a lot of gray there. But I think the younger generation, especially those that are going into the political spectrum, are saying, you know, you had your chance. But what's happening also is, too, again, the average age, 55 and older, you have a lot of people in your generation that won't move on. Mm-hmm. They won't say, okay, I had my chance. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like they want to hold on to it for as long as they can. And here comes these young people saying, all right, you know, it's time to let those reins go and be a mentor, or try to. But I think what happens is that people are afraid that they'll become just relics of the past, and mm-hmm. not, you know, they won't have the relevancy that they once had. Mm-hmm. So they try to hold on to that, or maybe even they've learned over time what mistakes they made, and now they're here trying to do the right thing. But, you know, young people saying, you had your chance, you should have did it, you know. And we now have more knowledge. We've been watching you. Mm-hmm. We've been watching your mistakes, and we've mm-hmm. been watching the things that we would do differently from you. So I see that as a parent. I think grandparents are much better parents than they are parents. You know, they're much better grandparents than they are as a parent, mm-hmm. because it's trial and error. They've had a chance to. So for me, I see it like, you know, watching my parents, and, you know, my parents were perfect. They weren't. But I learned from them, and I say, you know what? I see the things that I take from you, and then I see the things that I want to do differently. Right. So I think that's what's happening with this generation too, especially politically. Mm-hmm. The demand, the evolution in politics now, young people are stepping in and saying, we saw what you did, we like some of it, mm-hmm. but here's what we want to change. Mm-hmm. And there's some people so with a death grip on holding things to the way that what they think is right. Mm-hmm. They have this death grip on tradition. This is how it should be. Mm-hmm. And we're saying, no, this is how we want it to be. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where you get this sort of clash. You know, you get this headbutting, because, you know, we're evolving as a society, or we should be. We're evolving politically. We're evolving socially. Our minds are expanding to things that we probably didn't accept in the 60s and 70s. So we got to move with that, you know, and I think that's why young people are going, like myself, are going into politics, because we want to affect change in that too.
With regard to other aspects of society, of culture, church. Let's talk about the black church and the attitude of young people toward the traditional black church. You were raised as a Christian. You were raised to believe in worship and a certain theological perspective. I find that a lot of younger people are pursuing their own spiritual path, and as part of that, they're leaving the traditional church behind. What's been your experience with regard to that?
Oh, I 100% agree. I've never seen an exodus from the evangelical church like I see now, and I think part of it is because of their embrace of Donald Trump. But I also think a part of it is just a doctrinal rejection. So I was raised in a non-denominational church with Pentecostal traditions. I'm talking speaking in tongues, fire baptized, full of the Holy Ghost.
Okay.
You know, that tradition. And I think a lot of it has molded me into the person I am. But I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the hypocrisy I've witnessed too. And I think young people are much more keen on those types of things. Yes, there are some great things, and of course I encourage anybody, man, find you a church that you can be a part of and
Mm-hmm.
get there, because if you come in there looking for perfection, you're in the wrong place.
Mm-hmm.
But I think like you said, I don't think there are any absolutes. So I think what young people are saying is accept that. You know, you want me to accept this tradition as being all truth, and you can't say that and then in the same breath say there are no absolutes, there
Mm-hmm.
are some grays.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's why young people are saying, well, I'm going to find my own spiritual path, and if it leads me back here,
Mm-hmm.
then great. But if not, then that's great, because I have to find what's truth to me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I'm about that life too. I think that people have to find their truth. You know, my middle school teacher used to say, God is a gentleman. He'll never force himself on anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people have to find that truth. It may lead them back to the traditional black church.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there are some things that could be better. You know, particularly the embrace of young people.
Mm-hmm.
How you treat people when they come in, whether they feel welcome, if they feel judged, which, you know, it's just evolving. It's evolving with the time. No, I don't think you should compromise your ideas.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't think you have to bend and flex and twist your ideas to fit what someone wants you to be, because truth is truth. But I do think that there are some areas that you can be far more lenient in you know, for example, how people dress. I'm just using this as a wild example. So
Sure.
how people come, you know, there once was an expectation you wore a shirt and tie and suit to church.
Right.
You know, but times are changing. You know, people come in t-shirt and jeans, you know, and if they're there to get the truth, then let them be there to get the truth. You know, and
Okay, let's pursue that.
Okay.
Since you brought that one up as the example, no one here at Shiloh has ever said that you have to wear a coat and a tie to worship. People of a certain age simply do that because that's part of their tradition. They wear a coat and a tie, and they put on their Sunday best. In fact, that's why it's called their Sunday best. Nobody ever said that we're going to stop you at the door if you come in a t-shirt and blue jeans. Now, cutoffs, that's a whole other that's a whole other issue. But I find that using that as the example, I find that it's the young people who are more judgmental of older people than older people that are more judgmental of younger people. Younger people who walk into a church where people of a certain age are wearing coats and ties come to the conclusion, this is a stuffy place. Look at how they're dressed. Yeah, it doesn't. I'm being true to my tradition just as you want to be true to your tradition. And I think that communication could be far more helpful in those regards, to help us to recognize, you know, I'm not putting you down because you're wearing a t-shirt and blue jeans. Why should you put me down because I wear a coat and a tie?
See, I don't think any young people are thinking that. I don't. As a matter of fact, I think when young people walk in a church, they expect to see it. I think they would be mind blown if they walked in and saw older people dressed like them.
Okay.
So I think they expect it, but I do think that they also feel judged too. Like I think, again, it's us saying, look, this is you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I also think that they feel judged. I think when they walk in and they're not like that, you know, the side eye, like, why you coming in dressed with this? You know, you got on something look like you go to school or whatever, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, the communication is important.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is relaying that, hey man, this is an open door. Look, we want you to come and be comfortable, because at the end of the day, if you in here, hopefully you're gonna walk away with something that we wanted you to walk away with. So your being here is more important than your wearing a suit and tie. And I think communicating that is extremely important. And then that clears all minds. You know, you don't have me looking at you sideways and you ain't looking at me sideways. So if you want to wear your shirt and tie, wear it. If you want to come in here and in your basketball jersey and some jeans, wear that. Whatever you feel comfortable in, come in it. You know, be decent. Don't come in here looking.
From time to time, somebody will come to me and say, Reverend, we need to have a Come As You Are Sunday. And my response has always been, every Sunday's Come As You Are. Ain't nobody ever said you got to come a certain kind of way. Every Sunday to me,
but have they said you don't
come as you are?
Yeah, but have they communicated that you don't have to come dressed a certain way?
Sure.
Oh well then whatever, you know, to each their own.
So for me, the issue is communication.
Yeah.
One generation, rather than operating on a base of presumptions. Maybe we just need to sit down and talk to one another. I find that and of course church is my life, so I think more in terms of church as a community partner than perhaps other entities. I find that churches are far more cultural than they are theological. You know, nobody is going to have. That's just the coffee pot. Nobody is going to stay at a church too long that spouts pure theology, because theology is boring. Take it from me. It's boring. Churches are about culture, and churches are about homogeneity. People want to go to a place where they feel comfortable. When people look for a church, if you move into a new community, or if you move into a new state and you're looking for a church, I don't care how much money you spend on promotion. I don't care how much you put on television and radio and all this other kind of stuff. At the end of the day, they're going to say, Antoine, where do you go to church? And if I like Antoine, then I'm going to go to the church that Antoine goes to. Mm-hmm. Or I'll say, Antoine, I've been thinking about going to Shiloh. What you think about that? And if Antoine says, I don't know about going over there, then they're going to stay away. Not based on anything having to do with theology, but based upon someone else's opinion that they respect. So for me, the challenge of the traditional church, which Shiloh is, the challenge of the traditional church is communicating to people of succeeding generations that you are as welcome, your ideas are as welcome here as anybody else's. But, and there is a huge but behind that, we have a certain personality, and we're not going to deviate but so much from that personality, because there's more involved in church life than just you. Yeah. There were people who came before you who are still here, and we have to be as respectful of those people as we are of your generation. So communication to me is the issue. But I find that, and this is why I wanted to get your opinion, I find that church life for African American young people has shifted tremendously. Some are going to white-led churches, Pentecostal churches, which I have tremendous problems with. Some are going to churches that are non-denominational or interdenominational, where the focus seems to be more on again, homogeneity and a certain worship style that has less to do with liturgy and more to do with feelings of comfort and what have you. And traditional churches are searching for ways to remain relevant in the lives of these young people, because we getting old. We getting on out of here, and somebody else is going to be coming in to take our place. So it's a constant tension, and I'm asking you that not because I think you're an expert in church, but because you are an African American male of a certain generation who puts himself out into the community, who works with community people, and I'm sure that at some point church comes up. You can't be black and church doesn't come up sometime.
Well, let me tell you, I feel like I'm an expert in church. I don't know how many years of church you have to have, or how much theological study you have to be an expert in church, but I think I am. And the only thing I can't do is speak for most people. But I can't. I think, again, it comes down to flexibility and evolution. Same in politics and anything. You can evolve. You know, you don't have to move away from these deeply held traditional ideas, but you can evolve to be what I would consider to be more inclusive of other ideas. Some things you may not be able to implement. They might be too far out there. And look, man, I thank you for your, but this might not be the place for you. But I do think you can evolve. You can be inclusive of other people, and I think people have to see that evolution. You know, it can't just be lip service. I think what I see young people, when I talk to young people like myself and younger, they're more drawn to churches where it feels more like where they would go and hang out. You know, and they're hearing from young people too. Most of them, if there is a older generation that's supposed to have a youth ministry, right? They have people, and they are also involved in the main part of it too. The young people are involved in the main portion of the service. There are talkbacks like this, where the leader comes dressed like you are and say, hey, let's just talk. Right. You know, this ain't a service day. We just gonna talk, and I want to hear from you. Give me some ideas. Let's liven this place up. Yeah. You know, and you'll be surprised. I mean, you'll be surprised, because a lot of times young people are sitting on this stuff, and not to say that they're intimidated to tell you, but they just feel like it won't go anywhere. Right. They have great ideas and things that you could do that don't cost anything. It's just about evolving. As you know, hearing their ideas sometimes is a welcome response. Say, look, I just want to hear from you. You know, this ain't a service. We're gonna pray later. I just want to hear. Right. Let me hear what you got to say about X, Y, and Z. We're not rejecting your generation, because somebody gonna stand here. One of y'all gonna take my spot. Absolutely. So I want to make sure that your head is on right, that we're in alignment with your ideas, and that we start to implement those things, so that transition will be smooth. And it's not a culture shock. It's some strapping young pastor take over, and all the old people, what's going on, you know? Yeah. So that transition is smooth, and people have already gotten used to this by the time, and then that change will start again, and then, you know, but you start that pattern, you know, you say, well, I'm gonna start it with me. Yes, we're a church with tradition, but we can evolve. We can be flexible in our ideas enough to hear from young people and try and implement as much as we can to make you feel like we're hearing you, right, and we want you to be comfortable here. So I think that stuff just translates anywhere. And that's why our campaign has grown the way it has. That's why we're as popular as we are, and we travel all across the state talking to people, because we're listening. And that's what we did I'm gonna say we went on listening parties for 2 years. For 2 years, we traveled from Shreveport to the Gulf, listening. Where I didn't even tell people my name. Right. I just went and sat in their meetings. I would look on social media. I would see this Democratic group or this conservative group is holding a meeting, and I would just go sit in the back.
Go and show up.
Yeah, that's it. And oh, okay, you know, I'm listening because now I can implement a more well-rounded campaign. I know what conservatives want. And I'm an incessant Fox watcher. I listen to.
You were doing fine till you told me.
Well, no, I'm gonna tell you why. I listen to Limbaugh.
Mm-hmm.
There's probably not a conservative outlet that I don't read, because it's important to know what the enemy thinks too.
I agree. I used to do all of that when I was your age. There was a point that I reached where I just couldn't listen to it anymore.
Yeah.
I remember when Rush Limbaugh came on the air distinctly. It was 1987. I was pastoring down in New Orleans in my first pastorate, and he replaced a radio guy, national radio guy, named Owen Spann. And Owen Spann was as generic as anyone could possibly be. And so when Friday ended and Owen Spann's radio program ended, and Monday morning came, and what you heard was Rush Limbaugh on WWL radio in New Orleans, it was a completely shocking thing. And I listened to Limbaugh. I would be driving the streets in New Orleans, throwing stuff at my radio and cussing and doing all that kind of stuff. And I listened for years, probably 10, maybe longer than that. But at some point, you realize for Rush Limbaugh, much of that stuff is shtick.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
He doesn't believe most of the stuff.
No. He doesn't have to.
But he has generated an audience of people that are devoted to him. They will lie down in the road and have tanks run over them if Rush Limbaugh told them to do so. And that kind of blind loyalty to idiotic rhetoric, to simplistic rhetoric, is frightening to me. And it's one of the things that I push back against with regard to politics, not just in this nation. You know, I'm not big on national politics. I'm more a local guy. But the same things that are happening nationally are happening locally. This city is run by conservative people who are not brilliant. They just got money.
Tell me about it.
You know, these are not
rocket scientists.
These are not rocket scientists. These are good old boys and bubbas
with big pockets
who got a whole lot of money.
Yeah.
And they're making the decisions for the rest of this community that we have to live with, not based upon elite ideas, but based upon the fact that I can afford it. And Eddie Rispone ran for governor on no other platform than I agree with Donald Trump.
Agreed.
He didn't have an idea, didn't have a clue as to what was going on in this state. All he could say is, I agree with Donald Trump. And he came within 40,000 votes of winning.
That's right.
Simply because he agreed with Donald Trump. That's frightening to me.
Let me ask you this. Do you think that there are people who have no idea what the Metro Council does?
Yes.
Do you think they're in the majority?
I don't know whether or not they're in the majority, but I
think they are.
But I think that there's a large group of people who don't know what the Metro Council does. They don't read the newspaper. They don't listen to the Metro Council meetings, and what they get is third-hand information. Did you hear?
Do you think that the majority of people know what state reps do?
No.
I agree. So that's what we're doing. We're getting out there and telling people what these people do.
Right.
Most people, like yourself, don't follow national politics. They don't have time. Most people are worried about their 9-to-5s. Mm-hmm. They're worried about how they're going to literally put food on their tables. I got to go to work today. I don't have time to sit around and watch the congressional proceedings. I can't watch these hearings. I can't. I'm going to get third hand, fourth hand. My mom and them who's sitting at home listening to the radio, conversations about this.
Right.
Not facts. So what we're doing is on a crusade to bring the truth, because most people don't know. I do this all the time. I encourage you to do it. I do this every time I go and speak to a church, because I've been invited to, I call it the Black Church Tour. You know, all people that are running for office do it. It's true. The difference is you see me 3 or 4 years in advance.
Yeah.
I'm going to come sit in your audience and you won't know I'm there, because I don't need that. You know, but at the end of the day, I want to hear what you're teaching too.
Right.
But try it. Sunday, extra church service. How many of you know who our 8 congressional members are? By show of hands, can name them. I guarantee you might get 1 or 2 out of your whole congregation. Can name all 8. But every one of these people, we have 6 sitting congressmen and 2 senators. Every one of them, we have 1 Democrat, 1 black Democrat in Congress. Yeah. Every one of those other guys are making terrible decisions for your congregation.
Yes.
And if you don't know their names, how can you know what they're doing? So, okay, let's take it. How many of you know what district you live in? You might not get any hands. How many of you know who your state rep is? Who's if you live here in East Baton Rouge Parish, who's your Metro Council person? What district you live in? And believe it or not, the closer you get to the bottom, the fewer. And you would think, well, these are local people. How come?
Right.
But if you don't know who these people are, you've never spoken to them, how do you know how they're impacting your community? And a lot of people live out in the communities of people who are obstructionists on the Metro Council. And they don't even know it, right? Because they're not following that. Right. So that's why I say I think every church, more especially the black church, because we are at the greatest disparity. We have the highest mountain to climb when it comes to equality and equity in society. Everyone should have a leg of policy. Every one of them should have someone one day out of the month, whenever, once a quarter, whenever, talking about civic engagement, talking about the things that are going to particularly affect the church, because there are a lot of changes in policy that are made that might strip away your 501c3, you know, that may, you know, force you into politics or whatever the case may be. So, you know, and this is not far-fetched. This is something that's actually coming down the pike.
That's right.
So this type of stuff is extremely important. And you probably have political scholars sitting in your church.
I do.
So, but you might, the vast majority of people don't know what's going on. So I think this is extremely, and this is why we're doing what we're doing. Like I said, this campaign, we're not naive. The people that are working with us, we know what the obstacles are, but our crusade has always been about education. It's always been about using every single resource we have to bring the knowledge to the people. So even if I don't win or the person behind me doesn't win, people will become more politically active. We host a civic engagement course once a quarter. We do it for free. We don't charge anybody. And all we do, we don't talk about partisan politics. All we do is educate people about what each position does. We don't tell you to be Democrat or Republican. I don't care. What I care about is you knowing what your Metro Council person does, what your state rep does, what your what the assessor does, you know, what the judges, what their responsibilities are, what who these Congress members are, and the decisions that they've made thus far, and what they do. That's all we talk about. And you'll be surprised when people show up, because we hold them at the library. People show up that don't have a clue, don't know anything about politics, have previously been uninterested, but they walk out of there and they become more engaged than I am. You know, you see them on social media talking about this news and sharing this news article, and did you know this? And I said, whoa, you know, this person came from not knowing anything. To me, it's like a new Christian. You know, when you get that, when you first get saved, boom, you out like a rocket. Right. You out there telling everybody the good news. Right. So, but you make disciples out of those people, because they learn what they learn, and then they go out and they share it. So that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm not making disciples, but I'm just educating people about politics, and they go out and they share, and they get people in their circles involved, and it just spreads. So that's what we've been doing over the past few years.
As you have crisscrossed the state of Louisiana, I find that Louisiana is different depending upon what area of the state you're in. New Orleans is very different from Baton Rouge. Baton Rouge is very different from Alexandria. Alexandria is very different from Shreveport. Lake Charles and Lafayette are very different from other aspects of the state. What has been your experience with regard to receptivity to your candidacy? Which area of the state seems to be most receptive to what it is that you're trying to do?
It's funny that a Shreveport Democrat is not a New Orleans Democrat. They're different. The culture is different. The ideology is different. But what we have done is made sure we understand first before we go what the problems are. So we speak directly to that wherever we go. Now there are some what I consider to be universalities. Of course, New Orleans is much more progressive, and our campaign is much more progressive than a traditional campaign, traditional Democratic campaign. So, of course, South Louisiana, the reception that we get here is high because, but what I found is that we speak to the same issues everywhere, some of the same issues everywhere. Now there might be nuances, and we try our best. Again, we started years ago just listening. Right. It wasn't about, we just sat in those rooms and we wanted to hear what these groups were talking about, what matters to the women's groups, what matters to the deep Democratic groups, the moderate groups. We just listen. So when we go back to these places, we're speaking directly to their issues. We're talking about if they have an issue. For example, we went to Cutoff, Louisiana. Most people don't even know what that is. They didn't know there was a cutoff. We went there, and the guy was telling me he was working with the Port Authority. He was talking about the people that were losing their jobs because of offshore drilling. So these types of things, we go there and we listen. So we come back with a plan to address their issue. This is what our campaign wants to do specifically about this in Shreveport or this in Alexandria or whatever the case may be. So, some places have public hospitals that are closing, charity hospitals that are closing because the state isn't funneling any money, or the federal government isn't providing grants and opportunities to keep those hospitals.
Governor Jindal.
Yeah, right. So we go there. Boom. This is what we want to do. You have schools that are closing. We want to push for Title IV funding to put it, particularly in minority communities where the charter programs are taking over, whatever. So we go and talk to everybody, but we talk to them about their issues. We didn't just wake up last night and decide that this is something we want to do. Right. This is years in the making of and I think that's what has really built our popularity, is because we're not just showing up and asking you for something. We've been here, and that's what we do. So, of course, our reception is much more it's higher in South Louisiana because I think the deeper you go south, the more progressive our state gets on the Democratic end. But there are pockets of progressives everywhere, and I think there are some universalities in what Democrats want in general. Of course, there are nuanced differences because very conservative Democrats might be pro-life, for example, but all the other issues, are very relevant to them. Right. So, but we work it, we make it work. So,
well, I was just curious what your experience has been with regard to different mindsets depending upon geography within the state, and I find that you can't say that Louisiana is one thing.
No, it's not a monolith.
It just depends upon what part of the state that you are from. Getting away from politics for a second, you're a father. What's your experience like as a dad?
It's a learning experience. It's a learning experience. I tell all my friends, I talk to my friends who have kids too, and I say, my parents didn't have a manual. They learned as they went. Now, they happen to have 7 of us, but they learned too on the curb, and I think that's what I'm doing. I'm learning, but I wouldn't trade it for the world. I have learned a lot about myself too, about my level of patience and about my open-mindedness, my flexibility, my ability to evolve as a parent. So, yeah, I think when I start, my son, he'll be 16 in March.
Okay.
So when I had him fairly young, in my early 20s, so who I was in my 20s and who I am now, of course, is significantly different.
Right.
You know, my life experiences have shaped me, but I think I'm young enough to have an open mind about what he's experiencing and try to do the best I can to understand it, but at the same time keep him on the right path. Because let's be honest, I mean, he's a young black man, a young man who happens to be black, who's growing up in this era, in this society, in this environment. So the conversations that we have to have are much different probably from his white counterparts who are his same age, and the parents, the conversations that their parents are having with him. And I understand that, so I have to keep myself abreast of what's going on and evolve so that I can mold him to stay on this on the path that I think is right for him. It also understand and accept that he's making his choices too.
Right.
You know, and the older he gets, the closer he gets to adulthood, the more I have to say, okay, I have to sort of let my grips up.
Yeah.
Still molding, guiding him, but I feel like it's like in my mind. I just see teaching him how to ride a bike. It's you hold the handlebars and the seat, then you go to the seat, then you go to the So it's like it's this constant like. I want to let you ride on your own,
right.
But I have to be sure that you can hold your own balance, that you have balance, and that's a great analogy. But I think that's what it is for me. It's I'm gonna let you go, but I'm gonna hold on to this seat for a little while until I see that you can make the right decisions when you get out there. I'm gonna make sure you have on your helmet and your pads and all that. So that's what it is for me as a parent. It's a constant evolution. It's a constant understanding that I don't have all the answers either. But I have enough to guide you so where I can't control you. I can't be with you all the time, but I can educate you and make sure that you have enough knowledge to ride that bike by yourself. And I can trust you riding that bike by yourself. You're going to do the right thing, that type of stuff. So that it's a learning experience, to say the least.
You made the choice to plant your flag in Baton Rouge. You're a native, you're born here, live here, you're raising a son here. Do you want your son to plant his flag in Baton Rouge? And I know I ask this question of all my guests, and typically they say, well, I want them to go wherever they can be happy. I understand that. I'm not suggesting that you would do anything to prohibit him from doing that. I'm saying, would you be pleased knowing Baton Rouge as you do, involved in Baton Rouge politics and civic affairs as you are? Would you be pleased if your son chose to live in Baton Rouge?
I say yes and no. I say yes because I'm aware of what opportunities are there. And that we have a flagship university where I graduated. I say yes because I know the people here. I know he would have a strong base here, a big family here of support. But I say no because I think the evolution is slow. It's slow. Sometimes, I guess it makes you angry how slow it is. Too slow. The people that are making the decisions here have not evolved. And they just replace themselves with a replica. And my fear for him is that it's not evolving fast enough. And I don't want him to become a statistic or to end up in an environment where he can't flourish because of the rules and because the things are not evolving fast enough for him. So yeah, I say yes because I know what opportunities are there for him if he goes out there and gets, but I also know what obstacles are in his way. So I say no to that. I know what obstacles to those opportunities exist too. So I would love for him to go, of course, wherever he wants, but I would love for him to go in a place where he could get more than I got. He can flourish at a better pace, with less obstacles than I or people in generations before me have had to endure. I don't want him to have to take on that fight. Leave that fight to somebody who wants to do that. I think someone should, like myself or whoever that wants to take on that fight. But I want him to reap the benefits of the fight that I'm making, and I don't see it happening right now. It's an evolution. It's a slow grind, and it might not be my generation. It might be the ones to come after me, but I don't want him to have to wait that long. So, it's pros and cons. Pros and cons.
I think that's a very thoughtful, intelligent answer. I thank you for taking the time to come and share with us today on the Thrive podcast. I wish you much success in your candidacy for the United States Senate. Thank you for viewing. Thank you for listening. We'll be back again next time.